Making it last is all I care to do. You loving me, I loving you. Mothers and fathers, husbands and wives, sisters and brothers, friends for life, won't live in the past. All I wanna do now is making it last. Mothers and fathers, sisters and brothers, friends forever, strengthening the ties that keep us together.
It's time for another conversation. Welcome to Making It Last podcast, where it's all about helping us to have better relationships, not just with ourselves, but with other people. We're going to be talking with Nicole. Nicole, I don't want to mess your name up, so pronounce your last name for me.
Yes, of course. Nicole Coustier.
Coustier, right. Coustier. All right. So she's a life coach. And when you look on her social media platforms, you'll see what is called Aurelian coaching. Tell us what that is, Nicole, before we get into the conversation.
Yes, I'm a leadership development and life coach for high achievers.
Okay. So, for those who have been following this podcast, it's not just about relationships in terms of man-woman, platonic relationships. We also try to talk about work relationships. And what we're going to be talking about today zeroes in on that, because this podcast helps us to have better relationships, not just with ourselves, with other people. So, what role does emotional management have in the workplace and home? And what is emotional management so people have a context, Nicole?
Absolutely. To start off, Noreen made such a good point about relationships not being limited to partnerships. And in fact, what we find is that the relationships that we have in different settings bleed into relationships in other settings, right? So
true.
How we interact with our colleagues and our coworkers and our managers and the company leadership affects how we show up at home with our partner and our children. And so when I talk about emotional management, what I mean is, first of all, an awareness of what emotions we are experiencing so that we don't suppress them, so that we don't ignore them, and then they come back to bite us later. What I want to make sure that we are able to do as leaders, both in our home and at work, is to first of all make sure that we are aware of our emotions. And then secondly, once we are aware of those emotions, that we know what to do with them in a constructive way, and that we are not just experiencing emotions and those are affecting our relationships negatively, but that we can use our emotions to affect our relationships however we want to, in a positive, proactive way.
I know you've been enjoying the conversation, but we're going to take a little break and get a word from our sponsor.
Are you looking for one-of-a-kind products customized to suit your needs? Then shop at Trending Things, the place where customization is always an option. From personalized gifts to apparel, accessories, drinkware, and home decor, you name it, we make it. Get your favorite designs on any item for party favors, weddings, graduations, or any special occasion, all at affordable prices. What are you waiting for? Visit our website at trendingthings.com to order your trendy item today. Trending Things, bringing creativity to the things you love.
How then is emotional management different from emotional intelligence?
Emotional intelligence is awareness.
Okay.
And that is the first part of emotional management. But the second part of management is doing something with it. It is not enough to be aware.
Okay.
But if you are experiencing negativity in your relationship because of emotional overload, then you have an opportunity to affect how you feel. A lot of people don't realize that they can control how they feel.
Okay.
And that is such an important part of deciding how you want to be, how you want to show up, what kind of partner, what kind of employee you want to be in those roles.
All right. So no, we've basically gotten a context. What role then does emotional management? Let's start with the workplace first and then the home.
Yeah. So a lot of times emotional management is recognizing what you can control and what you can't control.
Mm-hmm.
What you can control is your own thinking and your own behavior, right? And so many times in the workplace, we feel subject to whatever everybody else is doing. And people feel as though my life would be better, my work would be better, if only my circumstances were different, or if only my boss would change, or if only my coworkers would be different. When the reality is, when you are able to manage your emotions in the job, decide in advance how you're feeling and what you want to feel instead, you can actually change your whole experience at the office. And you can change your whole experience whether you're working from home or whatever the situation might be. But that emotional intelligence can influence whether you have a good experience at work or a bad experience at work.
I know somebody's probably listening to that and saying, boy, that is easier said than done. And, so what are some of the practical tips that you'd share to say, hey, this is actually possible? And it's not just an elusive concept that's out there.
Yeah. So there's a five questions that I encourage people to ask themselves.
Okay.
The first question is, what are the facts of your situation? When you are able to separate the facts from your emotions about it, you are in a better position to control your thinking, control your behavior. But that's the first step. You have to actually separate. What are the facts of the situation? The second question to ask yourself is, given those facts, what do you make it mean? So your boss said something or your coworker did something, and how are you interpreting their behavior? How are you interpreting your situation? Are you making it mean that they're micromanaging you or that, whatever it might be? So you have to surface your thoughts and beliefs about those facts. The third question that you ask yourself is, when I'm thinking those things, now how do I feel? When I think that my boss is micromanaging me, what is the emotion that comes up? Do I feel frustrated? Am I angry? Do I feel injustice? Right? The fourth question you need to ask yourself is, when you feel that emotion, what do you do as a result? When I'm feeling angry, I'm going to show up differently in that work relationship than if I were feeling trusted or motivated or inspired. The fifth question is, depending on your behavior, now what results are you getting in that relationship? So those are the five questions. And in emotional management in the workplace, you can answer those five questions and you realize, or you decide, that this is not the result that I want. I want a different result. You can actually disrupt that cascade. You can say, you know what, I need to focus on different thoughts. These thoughts are not helping me. They're not improving my relationships. Perhaps a different thought pattern would be better.
Before we segue into what happens in terms of the home, somebody's listening there saying, okay, okay, let me use myself as an example. I'm very emotional, and I do have persons who report to me and who I manage and who I lead. Now, how if it is a situation that in some way I've gotten emotional. It doesn't happen very often now that I've gotten older. But let's say for argument's sake, for whatever reason I got very emotional, I probably didn't react as I should have. How easy is it then for me to then train myself to stop and ask myself these questions when it is for maybe 5-10 years, this is how I've always been?
Yeah.
How easy is that process for me to just, switch my mindset to incorporate these questions that you just mentioned?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. You're absolutely right in that it requires some reconditioning.
Mm-hmm.
The good news is that you don't have to catch yourself for any situation. You can always reflect upon it.
Okay.
And diagnose that cascade after the fact. And then, the more you do that, the more practiced you become. What ends up happening is you get better and better at catching yourself in the moment. So it does require reconditioning, but the good news is if you've had 10 years of operating one way, it doesn't require another 10 years to do it differently.
I know you've been enjoying the conversation, but we're going to take a little break and get a word from our sponsor. So, the whole idea of a branding strategy sounded so exotic and so fancy to me. But after having several conversations with Neon, I now have a clearer understanding. I am sure of what my identity is, what it is that I want people to see Noreen Daly as. Thanks, Neon. Thanks, Splint. Visit them at wearesplint.com.
Love that response. So now, as we segue into what role emotional management now would have now in the home, would these same 5 questions then apply, or is there a slightly different approach?
The 5 questions would still apply, and the review, it's what are the facts of the situation? What am I making those facts mean? In other words, what is my thinking or my interpretation? The third question is, as a result of that thinking, what emotion am I experiencing? Number 4 is, when I feel that emotion, how do I behave? And number 5 is, when I behave that way, what results do I get? Those are the 5 questions. They are also true in managing personal relationships at home, but I would add one additional concept, which is that everyone has a manual inside our brains for how people ought to behave. And what happens is that we assume that other people have the same manual for how people ought to behave. And when you are in a relationship in the home, especially a partnership or a marriage, you operate under the assumption that our manuals are the same. This is why we got married. This is why we're in this relationship, because we have the same manual. We have the same values. We have the same interpretations of all the situations, when in fact that's not true. It's just not true. There may be a significant overlap, but it doesn't mean it's true on everything. And so what happens in a lot of relationships when people are feeling distraught and disconnected and not feeling like they can manage their emotions, it's probably because at the root they have a behavioral manual that is not matching up with their partners. It's that disconnect that's causing the conflict and the strife.
I'm smiling because it's an interesting perspective, interesting way of looking at it, but that really is what happens in and not just relationships in terms of whether it's a romantic relationship, but right across the board, because everybody has their own interpretation of how this is supposed to flow or how it is supposed to happen, how it's supposed to relate. And as you said, the disconnect comes when, it really doesn't match up. Yeah. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. And so part of emotional management in the home is recognize when there's conflict and when there's strife, that you can take a step back. You have an opportunity to take a step back and say, what is my manual on this situation, and what is the other person's manual on this situation? If you can approach it from that perspective and identify where there is a lack of alignment, it can open up the channels of communication in a more neutral way.
As we're wrapping up, if it is that all that you said, somebody is still somewhat skeptical and cynical about this process that you've just described, what is the one idea that you'd want to leave with them?
That if they're skeptical, they can continue on their path, which is fine with me. If they are happy with the results that they're getting, fantastic, continue. Don't have to believe a word that I say. On the other hand, if you are not getting the results out of the relationship that you would like, then you must try this.
Excellent note to end on. Thank you so much for sharing, Nicole.
Thank you for having me.
This was Making It Last podcast. It's all about helping us to have better relationships, not just with ourselves, but with other people. I'm Noreen Daly. Until next time.
Are you struggling to become an effective communicator? Let Noreen Daly, the communications specialist, get you there. Services include communications consultancy, one-on-one coaching, public speaking and debate training, leadership and team building sessions, plus much more. Visit noreendaly.com for more info. Noreen Daly, redefining the way you communicate.
Mothers and fathers, husbands and wives, sisters and brothers, friends for life won't live.